In this lecture, we're going to learn how we can actually define our own function, that is how we can write the user defined function. Okay, so to achieve this, let's first take an example, that is to find the sum of factorials of two numbers. That is, I'm supposed to find out x factorial plus y factorial, and I'm supposed to display the sum of x factorial plus y factorial. So first of all, let's understand what is factorial of a number. So what is 5 factorial? You may already know 5 factorial is 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. So if you multiply this together, you will get 120 as the answer. So 5 factorial is equivalent to 120. Okay, so let's make it more generic. What is n factorial? N factorial is nothing but it is n times, it is n minus 1. Okay, because 5 minus 1 is 4 times n minus 2, that is 5 minus 2 is 3, and so on and so forth. I'll keep on multiplying up to 1. So this product is nothing but n factorial. So now let's try to write our own code to find the factorial of a number. So if I have to find the factorial of a number, let's say if I have to find 5 factorial, first of all I'll be needing a number 5. Let's say that number is n, so I write int n, and then I'll scan that number from the user. I'll write scanf, okay, and then I'll write %d. Let me assume that this is an integer number. Okay, generally we find the factorial for an integer number only. Okay, %n. So I scan this number from the user. Okay, so once I scan the number, now I need to somehow find this product. So if it is 5 factorial, I have to start finding the product starting from I equals to 5 up to I equals to 1. If it is 4 factorial, I'll start from 4 and then I'll have to go up to 1. So always I'll end my loop at 1. Okay, and then I'll start at 4, that is my n. Okay, so my I, let me have a variable I will control my loop. Okay, so let me have a loop here. How many times the loop is repeated? Loop is repeated for n times. So initially, what is the value of I? Initially I is nothing but n or 5 in case of this example. So I is initially n, and then I always must be greater than equals to 1, right? I is always greater than equals to 1, and then each time I must be decremented by 1. So from 5 it goes to 4, from 4 to 3, 3 to 2, and 2 to 1, and I'll stop there. Okay, so what I'll do here is each time I'll encounter a number. Okay, for the first time I is 5. Okay, so for the second time I is 4. Similarly, next time I is 3, then I is 2, and then I is 1. Okay, so what I have to do is I'll have to multiply these numbers together to get my product. Okay, let me assume that initially there is a number called as factorial that will actually be my answer. Initially my factorial fact is equals to 1. Okay, initially the product is 1. Okay, so I have not encountered any number as of now. As and when I encountered the number I, I'll just write factorial is equals to previous factorial, okay, times I. Okay, so initially factorial is 1. And then in the first iteration I is 5, so I will be multiplied. 5 will be multiplied with factorial, so factorial becomes 5 times 1 is 5. Okay, so this is 5, and for the next iteration 4 is encountered, so 4 will be multiplied with 5, so this becomes 20. Next times I is 3, so 3 will be multiplied with 20, so it will be 20 times 3, that is 60. Next iteration I becomes 2, so 2 will be multiplied with 60 to get the answer as 120. And finally value of I is 1, so 1 will be multiplied with 120 to get the answer as 120. Therefore I'll get the answer as 120. Okay, and then finally I can just print, because I have to print the value of the factorial. Okay, I'll just write factorial equals to %d, and then I'll just print this variable fact, which is my answer. So this code is actually finding the factorial of n. Okay, it will find the factorial of a number n. Now let me try to put or insert this entire thing in a function so that I can reuse it, because I need to use it 2 times here, because I need to find x factorial and y factorial. So it is a good idea to put this entire thing as a function so that I can reuse it multiple times. So if I have to make this as a function, what I need to do first is enclose this entire code in a block. Okay, that is opening brace and the closing brace, whatever comes inside this is a block. So first of all, you insert everything that is there in this particular code into the block. Okay. Now I need to provide a useful name to this block so that I can use that name to call this function and then take use of it. Okay. So let me name this block as factorial. Okay. Factorial. Okay. This can be any valid identifier. Okay. Now if we just look at this function, if I say this is a function, let's say if I say that factorial is a function, name of the function is factorial. Okay. What is the input? What is the input and what is the output? What is the input? What do I give into this function? I'm not passing anything to this function. Okay. Although I'm scanning the values, this is happening inside the function. So I say this entire thing is the body of my function. This is the body. Okay. But I'm not passing any variables to this. I'm not passing any input. There's no input to this. Okay. So I open the parenthesis just after the name and then close it. So this is an empty parenthesis, meaning that there is no input. Okay. Whenever it is empty, there's nothing here. So it means that there is no input to this function. I'm not passing any values to this function. Okay. I hope this is clear, right? This function is actually finding the factorial of n and finally it is displaying at the end. Okay. But it is not giving me any output. It is not returning me any value. Okay. Whoever calls this function will not get anything in return. It's like a return gift. It is not giving you the return gift, right? So the return gift or the return value is nothing. So I write void. Okay. Void meaning it is not giving you any back as a return value. And it is not taking any argument as an input. What it is actually doing is it is actually initializing the variables and then scanning the number, okay, finding the factorial and displaying that factorial. Okay, it is just displaying that, but it's not passing that value to someone else. It is not handing over that value. It is not returning that value to someone. Okay, so therefore if it is not returning, we write void. Void means nothing. No return value, no return type. Consider there is no return gift it is giving. Okay. So this is the syntax of any function definition. So how do I define a function is very simple. So first of all, what you have to write is the return type. What is the type of the return value? It can be integer type. It can be character type. It can be void if you are returning nothing. So in this case, the return type is void. Then you give a space. So there's a space here. Okay. Then you have to give a name of the function. So this can be any valid identifier name. Always give a useful name and the name that you can actually relate to. Okay. So give the name of the function and then you open the parenthesis, and inside this parenthesis you have to give the list of input that you are actually providing to this function. If you are providing any input to this function, all those inputs should be separated by comma. We're going to talk about the arguments in a subsequent slide. Okay. And then close the parenthesis. After that you open the brace and inside the brace you will write the body of the function. Okay. That is the definition or the processing part. The processing part goes in the body. Okay. So this entire thing is the processing part, and finally you will close the brace. Okay. So if you have to return any value, if you have given the return type, you have to return the value from the body of the function. Okay. So this is a syntax, a generic syntax for writing any function in C. So in this factorial function, the return type is void, meaning there is no return value. Okay. So there is no return value for this function. Therefore the output is nothing there. Similarly, the arguments or the input is also called as an argument. Okay. It is not taking any input. So input is also not there in this function. Okay. And the name of the function is factorial. What it does in the function is it will calculate and display n factorial. So this is the code, this is processing. In the processing, what it does is it will initialize n, it will initialize factorial I, and it will scan the value from the user. Okay, it will run a loop to find the factorial of a number n. Okay, and then it will find the factorial and display the factorial here itself. Okay, this is what is done in processing. Okay, now let us try to modify this function because we have to find out x factorial plus y factorial, right? So if I have to find x factorial, someone should return me the value of x factorial here itself. I do not just want to print x factorial. If I use this function, it will print me x factorial. But what I want is I want to get the value of x factorial and add that value with the answer of y factorial. So I need to get something as a return value, right? So let's try to modify this to make sure that it takes some input or it has some argument, and then it will do some processing and it will give the output. Okay, so let's assume that the input is the number n. I would like to find the factorial of n. Okay, and then output is nothing but n factorial. It should return me n fact. Let me assume that n and the factorial of n both are integer numbers. Okay, so let's write the function. The syntax goes very simple. First of all, I'll have to write the return type. So return type is what? It is going to return me the integer value, because the factorial of a number is an integer number. So it is going to return me the integer number. Okay, let me name the function as factorial itself. Let the name of the function be factorial. But if you are writing these two functions in the same program, it will not work, because both functions should have a different name. Okay, you should take care of that. Let me assume that the name of the function is factorial itself. Open the parenthesis. Okay, now you need to give the input. What is the input? It is the integer number n. Okay, so it will take the integer number n as the input. So I write int space n. Okay, so I need to declare that integer variable and open the brace like this. Okay, now this is where I do the processing part. Okay, so what do I do in processing is I need not declare the variable n because it is already there. So I have to have this variable I because I need to run a loop, and then I'll initialize the factorial as 1. Okay, that's the integer value. Then I need not scan the value. I just run a loop here for, okay, I equals to n. I'm running a loop from n to I greater than equals to 1. Okay, I minus minus. This we have already discussed. Okay, this is the same loop. Okay, and then I just write factorial is equals to previous factorial times I. Okay, this will find out the factorial. Okay, now once your factorial is found out, okay, what you have to do is now you have to return the value of a factorial, because you have told that the return value is integer. You have to return one integer value, that is the factorial of number n. That means you have to return fact. Okay, so I'll use a keyword called as return. Okay, so return is a keyword reserved in C, small letters, and then give space and give the name of the variable that you would like to return. Okay, so this will be returned to a place in a code where it was called. Okay, from somewhere in the code, this factorial function will be called by passing the input. Okay, wherever it was called, this factorial will be returned back to that point. Okay, so finally I return the factorial of a number. Okay, so this is a factorial function which takes integer argument. So it will take one argument, that is the number n, for which we need to find out the factorial, and it will return the integer value, that is the factorial of that number. So this is how this function works. It is advised to write a function like this, because now you can use this function anywhere you want. Now you can treat this function as a black box. You give any input, you'll get the output. You'll get the output as a return value. But in this case, in the first case, you will not get any return value. The factorial will just be displayed to you. Okay, if you do not get the return value, you will not be able to use that value to do the further calculations. So it is always advised to write a function which is complete in itself. That means it should take some input, do some processing, and return back some output. Okay, so the second one is more suitable for us. Now see, our objective was to find out x factorial plus y factorial. We have already written down a function, that is, we have defined the function. This is called as function definition. Okay, so we have already defined a function. The function name is factorial. It will take one input n as an argument, and then it will produce the factorial of that number. It will return back the factorial. Okay, now the question is, how do we use this function to find x factorial and y factorial? Okay, now we need to use this function. Right, now somewhere in the code, this is not the complete code, we are going to write the complete program for the same, but somewhere in the code you will have a line wherein you will have to call this function to find the factorial of x. Okay, let's say you already have some lines here, int x comma y. Okay, you already have some values for x as, let's say, 5 and for y as 3. Okay, so now how do I find 5 factorial? So let us store the factorial of x in the variable fact of x, and let me have one more variable to store the factorial of y, fact of y. Okay, so how do I find the factorial of x? Now I'm trying to use this function as a black box. Okay, it's very simple. what this function does is it will take one input, it will give you back the output. Okay, so if it takes n as the input, it will give you n factorial as the output. Okay, so how do I call this function? Now this is called as function call. I am trying to make a call to this function. Okay, so how do I call this function? Is very simple. You have to give the name of the function. What is the name of the function? You write factorial. It should be the same. Okay, factorial. Okay, and then you have to provide the argument. You are trying to find the factorial of what? Which variable or what number? I'm trying to find the factorial of x. So I can simply write the variable x here. No need to write int and anything like that here. You just pass the variable. Okay. So what will this line do is that this will actually call the factorial function. It will pass the value x in place of n. So n would be now treated as x. So x is here 5. So n would be now treated as 5. Okay, so we'll finally find out the 5 factorial and return back the value. Okay, return fact. So where will this fact be returned? It will be returned back to this point. Okay, so it will pass 5 and 120 would be received as the answer. Okay, so finally this 120, because it is there in the right hand side, therefore this value will be stored in the variable factorial of x. Similarly, you can find the factorial of y as fact y equals to factorial y. Okay, or instead of y, if you already know what is the value, because I already know y is 3, I can also write 3 here. There's no problem. Okay, so it will be 6. So factorial of 3 would be 6. 6 would be stored in the variable factorial of y, and then you can now add these two values to get your answer, that is x factorial plus y factorial. Okay, so I hope you have understood how to do a function call. So this is called as a function call. Okay, and this is function definition. I have defined my function here. Okay, and then I'm calling my function here. Okay, so you can call your function as many times as you want, but we just define our function once. Okay, so I hope this is clear. Now we're going to write a program to demonstrate the same. So now we are going to write a program to find the sum of x factorial and y factorial. Okay, so this is the main function that I have already defined. Initially, I'll be declaring the variable x, y and answer. Okay, I take the input from the user. I take the integer inputs x and y from the user. Okay, now what I need to do is I need to somehow write a function to find the factorial of a number. Okay, so we already have this function, main function defined here. Now we already have main function defined in our program. We need to define one more function to find the factorial of a number. So let me place that function just before the main function. Okay, after all my header files, let me define a function to find the factorial. So let me write it as a factorial function. Okay, so this is a function to find the factorial of a number. Okay, so how do I write a function? So first thing, I need to give the return type. So integer is the return type. Name of the function, let it be factorial. Okay, and it will take one argument, that is the of integer type. Okay, so it is trying to find the factorial of n. So as you have discussed, declare the variable I. Assume that the factorial fact is initialized to 1. Okay, then I'll have to run a loop. Let me run a for loop starting from I equals to n. I must be greater than equals to 1, I minus minus. Okay, and then I'll write factorial is equals to previous factorial times I. Okay, so this will find out the factorial. Once this loop ends at line number 14, I already have the factorial stored in the variable fact. So I'll return that. I use the keyword return fact. So this will be returned wherever it is called. Okay, so from line number 14, I'm returning back the factorial. Now I'm going to use this. I'm going to call this function from my main function. Okay, so in the main function, I've already taken two inputs, two integer values as the input, x and y. So I need to do a function call here. Okay, so now in line number 28, I'm going to make a function call. I'm going to call to the function factorial to find the factorial of x and factorial of y. Okay, so I can have one variable for storing the factorial of x as fact x and factorial of y as fact y. Okay, so I'll make a function call here. So I'll write fact x, okay, is a variable wherein I'll make a function call. I'll write factorial. This is the name of the function, this function factorial. Okay, and I'll pass the variable x. That is, I'm trying to find the factorial of variable x. So I'm trying to make a function call in line number 28. So whenever I write factorial of x, so this x will be passed to this variable n. So n will be equivalent to x for that instance, and then it will find the factorial of n, or x actually, okay, and it will return back the factorial as stated here in line number 14. So this factorial value will be returned back to this function call. So therefore factorial of x will contain the factorial of x. Okay, so now similarly factorial of y is nothing but, I make a function call factorial is a function, I give the argument as y. Okay, so then finally my answer is fact x plus fact y. Okay, I'm adding fact of x, that is factorial of x, and factorial of y, and then finally I'll display the output. Okay, so I'll display the output here. So what do I display is, I'll write printf answer is equals to %d, and my answer is ans. Okay, so this is done. So let me now open the terminal and compile this code. So I'll write gcc factorial function.c. okay, and then this is compiled properly, I guess. Yes, this is working fine. Now let's run this. Okay, two integer numbers, so let's say 5 is the first number and 3 is the second number. So the answer is 126, because 5 factorial is 120, 3 factorial is 6. So the sum is 120 plus 6 is 126, which is fine. Okay, you can try with some other input, 2 factorial plus 3 factorial. So it is 2 factorial is nothing but 2, and 3 factorial is 6. 2 plus 6 is 8. I get the correct answer, right? Now if you see here in the code, we have done the reusability of our code. That means we are actually reusing this factorial function time and again, right? So we are using it here in line number 28 and in line number 29. Okay, if factorial function was not there, I'll have to write a separate code for finding the factorial of x and a separate code for finding the factorial of y, which is not really advised in programming. Okay, whenever you find something is repeating, put it inside the loop, and whenever you find an opportunity of reusing your code, reuse your code. That is the principle in programming. You follow this principle in programming. Okay, do not repeat the same thing. If you have to repeat the same thing again and again, use loop. And if you want to reuse your code again and again, use function. Okay, now once this function is ready, I can actually use the same function in many of my programs as well. I hope in this lecture you have learned how to define your own function. Okay, whenever you are defining a function, how to decide on an argument, what is an argument of a function, or what is the input, what is the return type or return value of a function, how do you put your code in the processing or the body of the function, okay, and finally, how do you make a function call. Okay, so that's all in this lecture. Stay tuned.